Glory to you, O Lord.
Now, you all see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be. Let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The woman or man on the housetop should not go down or enter the house to take anything out. And the one in the field should not turn back to grab a garment. Woe to those who have a child in the womb and to those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it not be winter. For in those days there will be affliction of such a kind as has not been seen from the beginning of the creation that God created until now. No, and will never be. And if the living one had not cut short those days, no flesh would be saved. Rather, for the sake of the elect, whom God chose, God has cut short those days. And if anyone says to you, all at that time, look, here's the Messiah, or look, there is the Christ, do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, the elect. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Good morning. My name is Pastor L. I use pronouns like she or they, either one is fine. And I am the pastor of South Loop Campus Ministry here in Chicago. It's so good to be with you all today, even with such an intense gospel reading to preach on. This gospel reading for today in Mark paints us a grim picture. Run away to the mountains and don't turn back. Don't even stop to stuff some clothes in a bag to take with you. Woe to those of you who are pregnant or nursing. There will be affliction and a time of suffering that has never been seen before. It is bleak. And it makes sense. The Gospel of Mark was written just after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem during the Roman and Jewish War. For years, there had been uprisings by the Jewish people against the Roman occupation, until eventually there was a large-scale rebellion. And in response to that rebellion, the Roman Empire did as empire does. They punished the people, repressed dissidents, crushed the uprising, and snuffed out any remnant of revolutionary forces. The Roman military breached the outer walls of Jerusalem and laid a brutal 7-month siege on the city. And then once Jerusalem's defenses were weakened, the empire was able to overrun the inner walls and take the city, destroying the Holy Temple. This was not the first time that the temple had been destroyed. The Jewish people held generational trauma from the destruction of the first temple, when Babylon, another military superpower, had also laid siege on Jerusalem and captured the city, putting Jewish people into exile for generations. The rebuilding of the temple after the Babylonian exile was a major undertaking, full of meaning-making around Jewish identity and a sign of God's faithfulness and the people's resilience. So for an oppressive foreign power to destroy the temple, the center of community faith and life and Jewish identity, again, for the second time, was heartbreaking. It must have felt like the end of the world. The Jewish historian Josephus reported over 1 million deaths. Many others fled to surrounding areas in the Mediterranean, becoming a people in exile once again. Those who survived, who didn't flee Jerusalem, were captured, imprisoned, and enslaved by the Roman Empire. The Gospel of Mark was written with the historical backdrop of a desolate city after a failed uprising by a broken people whose hopes of liberation were completely dashed. In the midst of our own apocalyptic reality, of a world held siege by climate catastrophe, threats of nuclear war, white nationalist backlash against our own uprisings for racial justice, gender-based violence, and a global pandemic entering its third year, the words of Jesus in this passage seem pretty resonant. Woe to those who have a child in the womb or are nursing in those days. How many of us know people who are putting off having children because they're afraid of bringing them into a world like the one we're facing? Or for those of us with children, or even those of us who aren't parents but have children in our lives that we love, how many of us lie awake at night in terror about the world they will wake up to in the morning? Pray that it is not winter. After a summer of hoping the worst was behind us, as the days grew colder and people gathered more and more indoors, we saw the Omicron variant spike and COVID run rampant once again, exacerbated by the harsh reality of winter. We went back into quarantine, we upgraded masks, we canceled plans. Some of us couldn't stay home, some of us wouldn't. Some of us got sick, some of us didn't make it. These days, the most vulnerable among us, those incarcerated, trans children in Texas, refugees of war-torn countries, are experiencing an affliction that feels unlike anything that we've ever known, like it has not been from the beginning of the creation that God created. Mark's gospel reading does not tie things up neatly or promise us that things will be okay, but it does have real wisdom and a message for us in our own context. In times of upheaval or chaos or fear, it is easy for the truth to get distorted. When we are desperate for relief, there are always false prophets and opportunists who will take advantage of those anxieties. They will tell us that they are the answer to our problems, that their quick solutions and simple fixes will save us. But we will not be saved from destruction by politicians or institutions, the very systems that orchestrated the disasters that we're now facing in the first place. Individuals will pose as our saviors, telling us that they alone can rescue us. But our liberation does not come from politicians or political parties. It does not come from the systems that seduce us with false promises of security or familiar institutions that hearken us back to a simpler time. It is Jesus that saves us. Jesus who lives among and inside you and me and the people. Liberation does not come from star power and lone wolves. It does not lie in Washington, D.C., or in Hollywood, or in the stock market. Liberation comes from Jesus, through the people, through community, through radical solidarity with one another. Trauma can put us into survival mode, where all we can do is just get through. Trials and disasters can cause us to turn inward. The pull of a hyper-capitalistic society towards the myth of rugged individualism is strong. This Lent, we have an opportunity, once again, to recommit ourselves to one another and to our communities, to resist propaganda that seeks to turn us against each other, to push back against false messiahs by living out lives of solidarity, as Jesus modeled for us in his life and ministry. God came to us, God comes to us in the person of Jesus as solidarity incarnate. God came to us as one of us in a promise that we will not face any apocalypse alone. God is present with us at the end of the world and at beginnings. You might notice her in the budding signs of spring outside, or in the artists and prophets around us who remind us of the strength of the human spirit with moments of resiliency, creativity, and courage. God is present here, at the ends of the earth, among the people, within the people. Thanks be to God.